Hello, hello, I'm Kads, and welcome to the Raid Starter Pack. This is going to be a new mini-series I'm launching on the channel, catered toward those more in the early and the mid-game, and we're going to break down some content that you're going to experience potentially for the first time, how to tackle it, and what your first teams are going to look like. So if you would like to see more content in this vein, then be sure to let me know in the comment section down below, as well as let me know with that thumbs up, the like button down below. So today we're going to be tackling the first dungeon that you probably will be working on as far as getting gear in the game, and that is of course the man on the dungeons tab himself, the Dragon's Lair. Now, as this is meant to be an introductory course, let's go ahead and talk about how the dragon works and what he does. And thankfully, Plarium did add eventually the boss guide in the game, so you guys can check that out for yourself just to better understand how the dragon works, or any boss works for that matter. But let's go over it nonetheless. So on his A1, it's an AoE attack. It will place decreased attack, which just means that your attack-based damage dealers will deal less damage when they attack him. He also has the A2 Wall of Fire, where he will also attack all enemies, and then he'll place 2 poisons, big version for 3 turns on all enemies, as well as a weaken debuff for 2 turns. Weaken means that you take more damage and then 25% more damage, and poisons just deal poison damage, which is 5% of your max HP. Now the A3 here, Inhale, is where he usually kicks off with, where he will fully deplete everyone's turn meter regardless of how full it was, and then he will unlock the secret skill Scorch. And this is the key, because you do not want to get hit by Scorch, because it will stun your entire team if you have no way to block it and or prevent it. But he will not do this provided he takes enough damage whilst the skill is unlocked. So that could be just raw damage from nukers, it could be enemy max HP damage from those types of nukers, it could be poison damage, it could be HP burn damage, and we'll talk about which ones are best. As far as passives go, and these apply to basically every single boss in the game, they're going to be immune to all of the crowd control type debuffs such as stun, freeze, sleep, etc., fear. They're also going to be immune to HP swapping, HP balancing, all that type of stuff. You can't increase the cooldown of their skills, like with a warlord, for example, or a Sinesha, for example. So none of those things will work. And it's also not mentioned here, but specifically for dragons, any and all dragons in the game are immune to the decreased speed debuff, so you cannot reduce their speed, and they're immune to turn meter reducing effects as well, so you cannot reduce their turn meter. That does also generally apply to most bosses in the game, but some bosses are susceptible to turn meter control, and it's a strategy to do that, in fact. So when you're first getting into Dragon, obviously the first few stages are relatively easy, and basically your starter champion can probably just solo them, so it's not that much, not that big of a deal. But let's talk about when you really start to get into it. It starts to get a little bit difficult, again talking about more so the early game here, and your first target should be stage 13. Stage 13 is significant because that is when you start to get a chance to get 6-star artifacts, which are the best in the game at the moment, and you still get some 4-star, but you will start every once in a while to get some 6-star, and you get a healthy balance in between of 5-star gear, which is going to be the backbone of your gear starting out in the early game. Now, the reason you'd want to start farming Dragon is because you can get better quality gear than what you have from the campaign, which is where I would recommend that you start. I don't recommend you start farming dungeons immediately. They're not immediately required, and I think you should be spending most of your early game first month or two in the campaign, all the way through Brutal, potentially progressing somewhat into Nightmare, depending on your RNG of pulling champions that can help you with that, but focusing on the Palace of Aravia, as well as Valdemir Strait, where you can start to get speed and lifesteal gear, which is going to be the backbone of your early game experience as far as keeping your champions alive. But once you have a few of those sets from campaign and you want to progress a little bit better into quality gear as far as speed and lifesteal are concerned, then you want to start hitting the Dragon, where you can get speed, lifesteal, but also the accuracy set, which is weaker than the perception set, which you can get from the Forge by doing your Faction Wars keys. But obviously in the early game, you're not going to have a multitude of champions from different factions, so completing the Faction Wars or using your Faction Wars keys might be more difficult than it seems, and so the accuracy set can fill in there. Some of the other sets you get are nice to hold on to. Toxic is pretty niche, Destroy is pretty niche as well, Frost is very, very niche, and Daze, you know, these aren't as good. Stalwart is decent as far as reducing AoE damage that one takes, but again, it's still fairly niche and it's not generically used. But if all else fails, then you're just getting less used pieces of gear that you can sell, and while you wait and farm up the good pieces here, the top 3. If we're talking specifically in the early game here, I don't think you should care too much about the sets, especially these here at the bottom, because good gear pieces are good gear pieces, and stats are more important than sets. But as you progress through the mid game into the late game, then you can start to get a little bit more picky. But generally speaking, I still recommend that you just keep any and all good pieces regardless of set, because you can use them as offset pieces, and you never know when they might buff some of these lesser used sets to become something better, and then you want to have some of those pieces just lying around around just in case of that happening. So let's talk about your first dragon team. What is it going to look like? Something probably like this. We have Apothecary in the lead. Why is he here? Because he can keep our team running faster with increased speed, turn meter fill, but he's also a healer, and he does have a triple hitter on the A1, which is nice on the boss stage for dealing damage with the Mastery Giant Slayer. We have War Maiden in here, who's going to be our debuffer, applying AoE decreased defense, making the enemies take more damage by lowering their defense. We have Kale in here, who is equivalent of your starter. He was my starter on this account, and so you just have him on your account already, ready to go. And he's going to be our AoE damage to help kill the wave so that we can get all the way to the boss. Now we want a win condition of some sort, and so in this case I've opted for Frozen Banshee. She's one of the more accessible champions, being a rare, and she is a poison specialist. And poison is one of the best ways to kill the dragon. One, as I mentioned before, you cannot reduce dragon's turn meters or apply decreased speed. That means that he is going to go at the same turn rate every time. So if you always have poisons on him, he will always take poison damage every time he goes. And two, when you combine that with the starter, which could be Kale, doesn't necessarily have to be, but when you combine it with Kale, who is also a poisoner, you have a 1-2 punch as far as applying poisons to the boss. But you could also get away with strategies such as enemy max HP, could be an Armiger, who's an uncommon, it could be a Cold Heart if you're lucky enough to have her, avoid rare, or some other champion that you might have pulled. And you can also use HP burn, which is not as potent because you can only have 1 tick of HP burn, whereas you can have up to 10 potentially maximum debuff stacks of poisons on the boss. And lastly, we do have Reliquary Tender, another rare here, void rare, so albeit harder to obtain, but still a decent and accessible champion. And she's in there because she does have a cleanse, so we can get rid of the poisons if the dragon takes many turns when we get to his stage, and we don't want to be taking poison damage on our team, on our champions. But also she has a revive, so in case someone happens to go down during the waves, she can pick them back up and they can get right back into the fight. So let's go ahead and see this team in action. As I pretty much explained as far as the team comp, it's pretty straightforward, and we will see this team in action. So we have debuffing, we have a bit of nuking, and we can easily clear the waves. Obviously, I am in the end game, so this team is probably way overtuned for stage 13. Stage 13 is not hard for me, but you're not going to have necessarily this quality of gear in the early game, or you definitely won't have this quality of gear in the early game. And so this is not going to be as easy for you just starting out. But again, this is something to strive for. So your team's probably not going to run as quickly as this, but nonetheless, this is the types of champions you want to be using. So you want to make sure you have some way to debuff the waves. Warmin is a great choice because she is farmable from the campaign. You want to have some way to deal damage to the waves, and you want to have some way to deal with the boss and or survive the boss's attacks and or hits. So quick run there, 45 seconds for stage 13. So once you've beaten stage 13, you're going to keep progressing on your account in this dungeon as well as others, and as well as Demon Lord Clan Boss. So you're going to start to improve, you're going to start to get better gear. I would say the next milestone would be stage 16, where I believe you stop getting like brews and mystery shards and stuff like that, which are just not as good quality as far as compared to the gear that you get. And it's Void Affinity, which is nice, so you don't have to worry about negative affinity matchups. We're not going to show that because it's basically identical to the stage 13 team, but I do want to highlight stage 20, where is a very, very good spot to be, because you can see here between 19 and 20, 4-star gear drops off entirely, so your bare minimum is 5-star gear, which is again the backbone of your early into mid-game experience, and also you're going to get 6-star gear as well. Stage 20 is also still one of the most energy efficient stages to do, just because it's about 1-to-1 ratio relative to tournaments, respective tournaments, that you're going to get, you know, on average around 16 points in a tournament for spending 16 energy, and so it's just a great value overall, even over higher stages in normal mode and into hard mode. So now let's say you're more so in the mid-game, you finally got Seal of the Drakes after 6 months, and the team is essentially the same thing, but we just dropped off Apothecary because we have healing in Seal of the Drakes now, but we're also adding in crowd control with her being able to stun the waves. The waves are a lot tankier, so it's not going to be as easy as stage 13 where we're just kind of one-shotting our way through, and so we want to have some way to prevent the enemy waves from dealing too much damage to us. She also doubles with Reliquary Tender as another reviver, just in case, again, people go down, because this wave in particular is notorious for the Hordens, who can definitely start to snowball if they start to kill your champions. The win condition is still the same. We still have the double poison combo, and we still have War Maiden in here as our debuffer. But if you have better champions who can do that job when you get to this stage, then by all means swap them in. But if you happen to be unlucky and this is all you have still, then a team like this will still work for you. So now let's go ahead and run this team as well, so you guys can see it in action. It's not going to be that much different than stage 13, but it will take a bit longer just because the waves, as you can already see, are much tankier. So now we do have to contend with the fact that they might get turns, things might get resisted. You need to ensure that you have enough accuracy on your champions to do this, and usually the rule of thumb is around 10 points of accuracy per dungeon stage, all the way up to stage 20. It stays the same as you go up to stage 25, so you don't have to worry about it there. But yeah, unfortunately, I think we got resisted on the decreased defense for War Maiden on Apothecary. That gave him a chance to heal up the Horde in there. But they're both stunned, no big deal. Still, the Drake's doing her job. She is in a stun set in this build, and I'll talk about the builds on the champions after this, so you guys can see what they're working with. But again, this is going to take longer. The waves are a lot tankier, and this is why it is important to have some sort of debuff champion on your team. So there you go. We still have decreased defense on everyone except the furthest right Horden, but it rinse and repeat from wave 1. They're all stunned, which is nice. Power of Scylla the Drake's there. And so we're just going to wait until Kayle comes back around with the AoE to kind of keep damaging the waves. So Frozen Banshee, unfortunately, she is a great single target poisoner, but her one downside is that she is not great during the waves. She's basically useless, so she's not doing a ton. She'll show her power when we get to the boss. But a team like this, you do want to make sure that you can keep your Frozen Banshee alive. You don't want her dying along the way. Same thing with Kayle. I mean, even if they do, then if you have a Reviver, you're good to go. One thing to mention here is that, if you still don't have a Reliquary Tender at this point and you only have Scylla the Drakes, one of the more accessible revivers in the game is Broadmaw, because you can fuse him forever, essentially. And you can get 2 of the Void Rares from the Bazaar if you started to work on 3v3 or Tag Team Arena. So doing stuff like that can also get you a Broadmaw, which can be a reviver. In case you don't have Scylla yet, you're still in that, pre-6 month stage, or you just weren't lucky enough to pull some reviver from any of your shard pulls, or you haven't gotten a Reliquary Tender yet. So now we're into the meat of the fight against the dragon. You can see we dodge the Scorch by having enough poisons on him, and we're just continuously stacking him with poison, so he's basically not going to do much. And even if he does take a turn to hit us here, he's not going to hit that hard. He does have decreased attack on from Reliquary Tender. That's kind of more luck. She's actually not built with that much accuracy. But there you go. You can see here the power of Reliquary Tender there is cleansing off the decreased attack, which again reduces the damage that our attack-based nukers do. And we've filled the debuff bar so much that there's actually no room for decreased defense, so War Maiden's not doing much there. But yeah, so you can see this is pretty slow. But again, this is meant to be your first iteration of a Dragon 20 team. As you progress and get better and better champions, this time will come down more and more, again, as you improve your team. The main thing to highlight here is that we are focusing on success over speed. The speed comes with time and quality of your champions and your gear, but when you're just starting off, you just want to succeed because you don't want to be burning energy into failed runs. You want to make sure that you're winning 100% of the time. So you want to have some built-in sustainability within your team, whether that be CC, whether that be reviving, whether that be healing, any and all of the above, just to make sure that you always win regardless of what happens with the rogue 3% resists or anything like that. So now let's say you've entered the late game. You've been playing for over a year, you've gotten some decent quality champions, and you're ready to move deeper and further into Dragon. At this point, if you're lucky enough, this is where you start to incorporate Poison Explosion type compositions or Seer based composition into your team, or you can go with what we're going to show here, which was my old Dragon 25 team, where we just have a bunch of Poisoners and some DPS going on to be able to control the waves and kill the waves and then kill the dragon as well. First of all, bear in mind this is a big leap in time, so you're going to be a lot more developed, meaning you're going to have some legendaries on your account, some of them from daily login rewards, some of them from free champion chases going on, and just from your shard pulls. Not necessarily these specific ones, but you're going to have some level of better quality champions. So specific to this composition, we do have Urgrim in the lead here, one because of the speed aura, but he's one of our primary poisoners. We have Tomb Lord in here because he is also a poisoner, and then he also is our debuffer who is providing decreased defense and decreased attack. We have Dark Kayle in here, Noon Tower epic champion, because he can also provide decreased attack, he also brings some poisons, and he also can activate poisons on his A1. We have Stultus Dragonbane in here, who is known for his passive where he's immune to anything that essentially a Dracomorph could do, so decreased defense, weaken, as well as poisons, and he will reflect those back onto the attacker, in this case the dragon. So that is 4 ways to poison poison the dragon, as you can see here. And then we also have Ninja in here, who's a unobtainable champion at the time of this recording, but nonetheless, he's just a DPS champion, HP burn and activation on the boss. So essentially, we have loads of poisons and then a little bit of HP burn activation, and then Stultus is going to be our CC champion because he does have a stun in his kit. Note here that we do not have a reviver, and the only healing in the game is really just Eurogrim, who places continuous heals when he places the poison, but that's the luxury of being more later in the game, where you don't necessarily need as much support as long as you can deal with the waves accordingly. So let's go ahead and run this one so you guys can see this team in action. So this is going to be a lot different than the previous 2 iterations because, again, we're a little lacking less, or we have less of a support type role, and we're going a lot more aggressive, a lot more DPS. And you'll also notice here that we have 2 champions who are running negative affinity, so namely being Dark Kale and Ninja here. And so we're not relying on Dark Kale to place decrease attack. That is primarily Tomb Lord's job. And we're not relying on Ninja to place the freeze because, again, he's negative affinity. So you can see there, even with all of that, we still are focusing on the positive affinity matchup here, or the neutral affinity matchup here with Stultus Dragonbane. Doing his job there, leading off with the stun. Again, we don't really care if the freeze lands. And we're getting a lot of damage from the poisons, just because poisons do a percentage amount of the enemy's max HP. In this case, big version of poison, 5%. So it is consistent damage, and it would be better if we had some sort of poison activation to make that even faster. But even without it, you can see, as long as we keep the waves controlled, they will eventually just die because we're stacking them with a ton of poisons. So there we go, coming back around, last guy here, and we're looking at about, a minute or so to get through the first 2 waves. In this case, I guess we're getting closer to around 90 seconds, a little bit of bad RNG. So onto the dragon here, you can see this is where we just start to layer on all the DPS. We have Eurogrim starting some poisons. We have Dark Kale placing some poisons. We have Ninja doing ninja things. So Tomb Lord again is our debuffer, so decrease attack as well as decrease defense. And then now we can kind of start activating poisons, placing a bit more. I think Ninja's going to go for the A2 here. Dark Kale popping poisons on the A1. We dodge the Scorch once again. Very important, like I said, we don't have the team here that can take that hit necessarily, at least not too many times. And I guess I forgot to mention that every time he gets the Scorch off, it hits harder and harder. So you really don't want to take that hit, and especially you don't want to take that hit multiple times. I think after like the 3rd or 4th one, it's basically enough to just kill whoever you have on your team regardless. So this run is probably going to be somewhere in the 2 to 2.5 minute range. I think we got a little bit of bad RNG. So okay, or Ninja just ends it right there. So just over 2 minutes. And again, this is an example of a later game team where you have a lot more champions, better quality, that are more specialized for dungeons in this case. And again, you don't always need a bunch of supports around them. It depends on the dungeon. In this case, Dragon is considered the easiest dungeon, right? And so I'm not too worried about people dying. Even if they do die, there's a lot of redundancy here. We have 4 ways to poison the boss, as well as another champion who can place and activate HP burns. And even though Ninja is negative affinity, more often than not, he's still going to land a couple of HP burns and activate them, so it still works. So the last thing to talk about for your dungeon progression is, of course, eventually you'll get to the end game where you can start worrying about Dragon hard mode. Now, in fairness, you can push as far as you feel comfortable, even in the early game, in the mid game, etc. These aren't hard, fast rules that you can only do this stage after this amount of time. It depends on who you have, the gear you have, and you can try pushing higher in stages, and if you start to lose, then back it off a little bit and go back to where it was always 100% success. But here we're focusing on the end game, so you've been playing for a year or more, or multiple years, you have a bunch of champions on your account, you're stacked out, and you're ready to deal with hard mode Dragon. And we'll just hop into stage 10 just to jump all the way to the end. Take a look quickly at the boss guide here, because hard mode does change it a little bit. He's now tainted Hellraiser instead of just normal Hellraiser. So notable things here, AoE, or the A1 is still the same AoE attack with decreased attack, but the instead the A2 now places 4 poisons and still places the big version of Weaken, and they last for 3 turns. So it's there's a lot more poisons, and they last for longer, and it also puts increased attack on himself. This is the ability now he leads off with. He no longer leads on with the A3 going into the secret skill. But speaking of the A3, it still does fully deplete the turn meter of your team, and then it unlocks the new secret skill, which does the same thing. It will stun your entire team if there's no way to block it or prevent it, but more importantly, it will also activate any poisons on each of the targets. So he has Poison Explosion in that ability. So now it's even worse if you are not prepared, you don't have block debuffs, or you didn't cleanse them off. You can get melted by this ability if you just let him pop all the poisons on your team. More notably for the passive this time, and I forgot to mention that for stage 21 through 25, enemy max HP hits cannot exceed 10% of the boss's max HP. So which again emphasizes the fact that we probably want to go more so towards poison HP burn activation, just because enemy max HP hits like Seer or a Cold Heart or something of that ilk is going to be capped. The last passive is exclusive to hard mode and it is somewhat ignorable, but you do take less damage and deal more damage based on your awakening level. So if you have blessings on your champions, that's not paramount, that's not required in order to do hard mode or anything like that, but it does make your champions a bit more resilient and make them deal more damage. So as I mentioned before, I am definitely in the end game, and so I have my hard mode 10 team right here, which is virtually identical to my former Dragon 25 team, except that we took out Ninja and we swapped in Python because we needed a bit more survivability. Recall what I said earlier about striving for 100% success, and Python does ensure that for me, being an AoE reviver, but also having a cleanse and a block debuff, so that even in the worst case, we probably won't get stunned because we have block debuffs up, we can block some of the poisons, and we can also cleanse some of the poisons. So since this is my primary team at the moment, as well as there being a Dragon tournament going on right now, we're going to go ahead and click the Super Raid button, because why not? Might as well use twice as much energy and get twice as many rewards. So let's get into this team. It's going to be virtually identical to the Dragon 25 run, although the enemy waves are a lot different. So we still have the same thing. We're stacking them with poisons. We're redundantly placing Decrease Attack between Dark Kael and Tomb Lord. And then we have Stultus Dragonbane, again, being our CC champion with the stun. This is where you can start to focus a little bit more on like AI overrides. So for example, I don't want Tomb Lord to use his A3 multiple times on wave 1, so I start to turn it off. I don't want Stultus to use the stun when they're about to die, like right there is usually where he'd use it again. I want him to have it up for wave 2. So start min-maxing your teams with the AI overrides, just because you can get a little bit of efficiency out of your runs that way. And yeah, unfortunately there, oh man, we got double resist on the stun from Cardinal and Venus. So that's not going to be the best thing, but it's okay. Even if we get debuffed, not a big deal. Again, they're stacked with a bunch of poisons, and we have Python in there to support the team and cleanse that right off. So unfortunately, not stunning the Cardinal means that she can get the revive off, which does not affect the success of the run, but it does affect the speed of the run. So moving on to the Dragon here, you can see we're just under 90 seconds, pretty similar to Dragon 25. And you can see that the Dragon is a lot faster, so he takes turns very quickly, but it's fine because we're ready with Python right away with the cleanse. We're maintaining Decrease Attack between Tomb Lord and Dark Kael again, and we're still stacking them with poisons. Now this is where Stultus starts to really shine, because again, he reflects the poisons back to the boss, and so every time he tries to use the poison ability, he's basically going to fill his own debuff bar, because he does try to place 4 poisons on everyone. And specifically Stultus reflecting all of those back means that the Dragon puts 4 poisons on himself for a 3-turn duration. So he kind of does that job for us. So Python is ready to go right again. We kind of have that speed tune to a degree, so that he's always going to be ready to cleanse after the poisons are placed, so we don't have to worry about that. And in this composition, I'm not really dealing with the fact that the Dragon puts increased attack on himself. We're kind of just face tanking it, because I know that my team is tanky enough to survive the hits. And absolute worst case, people start to die, Python picks them up, and they're good to go right away. So the main thing to highlight here relative to a normal mode stage 25 is that we're getting roughly the same time, even though there's slightly more support in the team. And that is primarily because, like I said, the Dragon is a lot faster, meaning that he's taking more turns, meaning that as long as you're maintaining a bunch of poisons on him, he's going to be killing himself even faster. And this would have been a faster run, again, if Cardinal on wave 2 didn't get the unlucky 3% resist there on the stun and didn't revive or waste a turn reviving people that we had to then kill again. So stuff like that can affect the time of your run, and in this case it's pretty average as far as being just over 2 minutes. So now, as promised, let's talk about the builds on these champions showcased in these teams. Now let's get the massive disclaimer out of the way, that being that I am an endgame player, so these are going to be endgame builds. And the way that you scale these builds back to where you are in your progression is that you get rid of the bonus stats, and I'll try to highlight those on each of the champions that I mentioned here specifically. So let's start at the bottom with our trusty Apothecary. Now the first thing I want to highlight here is that you can see that he is in defense percentage on the gloves and HP percentage on the chest, and then some speed on the boots. But if we look at his total stats, you can see here almost 50,000 HP, not fully maxed out because the gear isn't fully maxed out. I didn't need it for the purpose of the showcase, but in the early game, you're probably going to want to have his HP maxed out in case you're taking hits from the enemy waves. Defense is just under 2800. Speed is fairly decent at 238. Full crit rate, and again, notice that we do not have crit rate gloves on him because I do have enough crit rate in the substats, but if you're more in the earlier game, I would definitely put him in crit rate gloves if you want to get that critical heal on the A2, but if that's not even an option for you, just go HP defense and forget about crit rate entirely. I did also give him enough resistance to be able to resist some of the poison from the dragon if that was the case, but again, in the early game, you don't necessarily need resistance on him. That is most certainly a bonus. For his masteries, you can see here that we went down the offense and support tree. We're getting a bunch of the healing masteries because he is a healer, lasting gifts because he is meant to, it can extend the duration of the increased speed, and then we're coming down here to Giant Slayer, which is because he has a triple hitter on the A1 as far as the offense tree. So offense and support tree for the masteries. And I guess I forgot to mention the sets. I do have him in a speed set and then a crit rate set, which is not that used, but I find it useful on supports that happen to need maximum crit rate or full crit rate, just because it's able to add 12%, and they don't really need to have crit damage. It's just having crit rate that's beneficial. In this case, I do have a blessing on him in Miracle Heal, but that was because I was testing him on a certain team in a different dungeon. But I would probably more so go with like Phantom Touch because he is a rare, or one of the things that prevents debuffs or blocks debuffs potentially landing on him. And then again, that's if you happen to get a blessing for him. He is a rare, so it's more likely if you're getting more into the blessing aspect of the game, but just keep that in mind. Next up, we have Frozen Banshee, who you can see here in All Out Retaliation. Now, this build is specific because I do use her as the rare that you have to use on your brutal or on your Demon Lord Clan Boss key for that advanced quest that pops up every once in a while. And I just have her in Retaliation because I just want her to counterattack as many times and place as many poisons as possible because of how her kit works with the A1 and the A3. So her total stats are 35k on the HP, not really built for survivability because I just don't need that anymore. But if I was starting out again, I would probably build her a bit more tanky just to be able to tank some hits, because again, she's not doing much for the waves and she needs to stay alive so that she can do her job against the dragon. Pretty low again on the defense at just under 2000. Pretty average speed, 200, but that's probably appropriate for even in the early game dungeons. Full crit rate, absolutely not mandatory, but I just put that on her because again, I do use her in Demon Lord Clan Boss, so I might as well get the crit rate and a little bit of crit damage out of her. And then she has just enough accuracy to deal with either those low stages of dungeons as well as brutal Demon Lord Clan Boss. For the blessing on her, I did go with Phantom Touch because she is built with a little bit of damage in mind, and so just getting a little bit more damage from occasional Phantom Touch procs just helps. And then for the masteries, kind of the standard clan boss type build. And in this case, it's assuming that she's going to do a lot of counterattacking, which is why she's in the retaliation set. And so we're hugging the right side a little bit of getting the accuracy tree of the support tree, but we're really focusing on the offense tree, left hand side, and coming down to War Master for the double hitter on the A1. And I guess I should mention the recommended sets. So if you're in the early game, Apothecary, he is great, and like as many speed sets as you can get on him, he just works. Having him go faster works well. If you can get him in Relentless, that is also pretty decent as well. I used to use that in the early game. Lifesteal is probably your best bet for a champion like Frozen Banshee early on, especially if you're using her in Demon Lord Clan Boss. As you progress, Retaliation again is a absolute luxury of the late game end game. Next up, we have my OG starter Kale, who has been repurposed into a stun set. This is specifically for Doom Tower Secret Rooms. Definitely not advisable for your early game starter Kale. You're probably going to have him in that lifesteal that you got at the beginning of the game, and you're going to want to run that for a good while until you can upgrade to something better, or you can switch him over to be like your first arena nuker. So for his stats, he is built to deal damage, so pretty low on the HP, 30,000. Again, if you're in the earlier game, you'd want him to be more sustainable, so he can last longer in Demon Lord Clan Boss, that's where you're using him, or last longer in dungeons if you're taking damage. Just under 3,800 on the attack, 1,800 on the defense, again relatively low. I would want that higher if I wanted to keep him alive more often. 189 on the speed, it's just kind of middle of the range, good speed for a nuker slash wave DPS. Full crit rate, 223 on the crit damage. Again, you're probably not going to have that much crit damage in the early game. You're probably going to be running crit rate on the gauntlets, and then maybe some crit damage on the amulet if you get lucky enough. from Spider. But more importantly here, accuracy pretty low, 235, but it is enough to deal with stage 20 dungeons. You want to have around, like I said, around 10 points of accuracy per the dungeon stage you're doing up to stage 20, and then it stays the same. And the requirements do go up for hard mode. It goes up to around 350 accuracy. Hard mode stage 10. Once again, since he is built for damage, I do have Phantom Touch as a blessing on him. And for the masteries, we went in an entirely different route, offense and defense. So getting some of the damage masteries here on the left-hand side, but most importantly, coming down the defense tree because he's in a stun set to Fearsome Presence to increase the chances of landing that stun from the stun set. Next up, we do have my Reliquary Tender, who is built in a Relentless set, and I've had her in Relentless for as long as I could have gotten it on her. Again, that is most certainly a luxury, I would think, in the earlier game. If you happen to pull her, triple speed set is probably the way to go. You want her to be survivable because she cannot revive anyone if she is dead. So we have a pretty healthy amount of HP on her, 60,000, 2,700 on the defense. She's not a damage dealer, so we don't care about the attack. 240 speed, so pretty fast even without a speed set. Mind you, we don't care about crit rate, crit damage, and I opted for high resistance. That is a bonus stat, most certainly. You don't really need it. It just helps her not take debuffs and just deal with, be able to cleanse it off everyone else, because she can't do that, again, if she's stunned or if she's dead. In terms of blessings, I opted for Dark Resolve on her. She is a rare, so you're limited to only the rare blessings, but because I do use her in my Faction Wars team, and the boss does have a chance to place freezes, I just went with Dark Resolve, just 10% chance that she might not get frozen by the boss because it cannot be resisted regardless of the amount of resistance you have, and then she can just keep the cleanse or keep the freezes and provokes off of my allies. For the masteries, she is definitely offense and support tree, and you can see here that I didn't actually finish. I didn't get the last T5. I didn't really find it necessary, but I'd probably go with Spirit Haste if I really needed it. So a little bit of the healing masteries, a little bit of the turn meter manipulation or turn meter boosting masteries. I probably don't even need Arcane Celerity, honestly. I haven't changed her masteries in years at this point, but I probably wouldn't go for this anymore because she's not built with accuracy, meaning she's not going to land anything on the A1. However, these abilities here, or these masteries here, don't really work with continuous heals. She doesn't provide any healing outside of that, and so it doesn't really help. Those don't help either, so I would probably get something on the offense tree. But highlight here that we're coming down to the tier 6 of getting War Master. You can definitely do this if she's not, she doesn't have a chance of dying and you're not worried about that, and you just want to get a little bit more damage against bosses against her or with her. But if you wanted to go more of the safe route, then I would recommend Timely Intervention, because anytime an ally drops low, she gets more turn meter, which means that she's more likely to either get her heal off or get the cleanse off, get the continuous heals rolling, or potentially pick up allies if they happen to die, which is also below 25%. Next up, we do have War Maiden, who I just have in Perception and Immortal. She can be in so many different types of sets, but you do, as a debuffer, you do want her the fastest on your team as far as going before your nukers, but also just having a good amount of speed and a good amount of accuracy for whatever content you're working on. Now, in my case, she is still my Faction Wars debuffer, so I do have her built relatively fast, and then she has enough accuracy to be able to do that in dungeons as well as in Faction Wars. So again, mine is built for damage because I have that luxury in the end game, but you probably want to build more of a tanky and supportive War Maiden if you're focusing on the early game. 41k on the HP, just under 3,000 on the attack, really low defense is 1,600. Her base is pretty bad, but I'm not trying to boost it in any way in this particular build. 236 on the speed, full crit rate, 210 crit damage. Again, that's a luxury. You don't really need to build her for damage, but she does hit decently hard on the A2 specifically, and then enough accuracy to do the job at 278. Just like Kale and Frozen Banshee, who are built for damage, I went with Phantom Touch for the blessing. It scales off of attack, so it's just more damage or more chances to do more damage. And then, as you might guess, offense and support tree. So we're going down the right-hand side, so the debuffer aspect of the support tree, and we're targeting the left side of the offense tree, coming down to War Master to deal more damage against bosses. As far as recommended sets in the early game, you can try and get her into lifesteal with your starter, depending on if you were farming the campaign or you started to farm dragon, or you can have her in a lots of speed and perception sets, just again to ensure that she goes before your nukers. So whatever works in the early game. Moving on, we do have my Seal of the Drakes here, who I have in a stun set. A lot of people do like her in Relentless, and it definitely works if you can get her in it, but I've always been a fan of the stun set because she doesn't have a 100% chance to stun on the A2, and so I like having the stun set as a backup, and also whenever she uses the A1, there's another chance to stun. So stun set and speed. As far as her total stats, we don't care about her damage at all whatsoever. So we just want her to survive, again, just like Reliquary Tender. If she's dead, she can't pick people up. So just under 55,000 on the HP, 3,500 on the defense, 222 on the speed, no crit rate, crit damage, and then enough accuracy to land the stuns on Doom Tower hard waves, because that is where I used to use her. And of course, I also used her in dungeons and such in my progression, but this is the build where I kind of stopped building up her stats. I don't have a blessing on my Soul of the Drakes, but if I had to pick one, I'd probably go with something like Intimidating Presence. She's a good champion for that, gives you good stats, a little bit of resistance. And Temporal Chains would probably be a good one too. It gives, again, survivability stats, but a little bit of accuracy and speed. As far as the masteries, you're going to see that she is a mirror reflection of Kayle, meaning that she went the defense and support tree. So we're going down, picking up things on the turn meter for placing buffs, which she does have increased speed on her passive, as well as Arcane Celerity here for the opposite for when she places the stuns and decreased speed on the A1. We want Spirit Haste. Again, she's a reviver, so we want her to go faster if people are dying, and so if she needs to pick them up. And then on the defense tree, we're kind of coming down all the way to Fearsome Presence, once again, increasing the chance of landing the stun on her A2, but also on the stun set. Next up, we have Ninja, controversial champion who people can't get anymore. But nonetheless, I was lucky enough to play back when he was available, and I do still have mine in a Relentless set as well as Perception. So if we look at the total stats here, he is built to survive, but also deal some damage. 45,000 on the HP, 3,500 on the attack, 2k on the defense, 215 on the speed, overcapped on the crit rate, 111. I really want to fix that, but I don't have the gear to do it just yet. And then 234 on the crit damage and 355 on the accuracy. Again, enough for Doom Tower hard. The blessing I went on him was Brimstone, of course, which would give him HP and accuracy, but also just the chance to land the Smite debuff. And then if we're looking at the masteries, offense and support tree, again, following the accuracy route for the support tree, and then coming down the offense tree all the way to War Master for the single hitter on the A1. Next up, we do have Dark Kayle, who's also in a Relentless set, getting extra turns, as well as the Perception set. If we look at his total stats, he is built to be survivable, but he also needs full crit rate in order to function with his A2 properly. So 4,300 on, or 43,000 on the HP, 3k on the attack, 2,400 on the defense, 241 on the speed, so pretty quick, full crit rate, and then again enough accuracy for Doom Tower hard and hard mode dungeons. For the blessing on him, I did go with Cruelty because he does have an AoE, so he does tend to hit enemies, and he also has a triple hitter on the A1, which means it ramps up very, very quickly once you get to the boss stages, so permanently decreasing their defense until the end of the round. For the masteries, kind of similar vein as Ninja, where we're focusing on the accuracy boosting stuff with a little bit of debuff turn meter going on the right hand side. We want Sniper to increase the chance of popping poisons on the A1, Master Hexer to extend the duration of the poisons that you can place, and then on the offense tree, Hug on the left side, but making sure to come all the way back to Giant Slayer because of the triple hitter on the A1. Next up, we have my Uragrim, who's in Stone Skin and Perception and Immortal, and make note that this is an extremely endgame build, so if you have him early enough or in the mid game, I would focus mostly on just having enough accuracy to land the poisons. So his total stats, so you can see here, 63,000 on the HP, I guess 64k almost, 3,500 almost on the defense, 252 on the speed, 470 resistance, and then 350 accuracy. So what he is built for is not being able to be debuffed if I'm using him in Doom Tower hard or hard mode dungeons, and then still being able to land his own poisons, his own debuffs on the A2 and the A1 with 352 accuracy. For blessing, I just went with Commanding Presence just to give him a little bit more HP, but I could also see an argument for like Iron Will if you're using it in Ice Golem specifically, and other stuff like that. For the masteries, we're going down the defense and support tree, picking up a lot of the healing stuff because he does have a heal on his A3, a little bit of a turn meter for debuffs because he does put out a lot of poisons, lasting gifts because of the continuous heals, Master Hexer because of the poisons again, and then on the defense tree, kind of getting the tanky survivability regime with resistance, and then coming down to Unshakable to get more resistance. Next up, we have Tomb Lord, who is just in Resilience. I've tweaked his gear a number of times, but this is where I've settled more recently. And again, he's built more for survivability and a little bit of damage. So 52k on the HP, 3,200 on the attack, 2,500 on the defense, 256 on the speed. So very, very quick, despite not being in a speed set or anything like that, or perception. Full crit rate, because that is what you need for the poisons to be four poisons to be happening on the A2, and then a little bit of crit damage as a bonus. 352 on the accuracy, once again enough for Doom Tower hard and hard mode dungeons. For blessings, I don't have one. If he's one of your few legendaries, and I would probably go like with Brimstone. But if you have a bunch of other legendaries who have Brimstone, I'd probably go with actually Phantom Touch, just because of the triple hitter on the A1, specifically probably for Fire Knight progression, where you want an extra hit is an extra hit into the shield. For the masteries, you can probably guess he's similar to Dark Gale with the triple hitter on the A1. So we're hugging the right side of the support tree with the more accuracy debuffer side of the support tree, and hugging the left side of the offense tree, but making sure to come back towards Giant Slayer because of the triple hitter on the A1. Back to another super endgame build, we do have my Stultus Dragonbane, who is not built in regen or anything like that to survive on the dragon. He is built to nuke for the arena, but he does double duty with being able to smack in the Dragon's Den on the wave as well. If we take a look at his total stats, he's in a Savage set and Perception. You can see that there. But if we look at his total stats, 43k on the HP, almost 44, 5.4k on the defense, so built to absolutely hit like a truck. 215 on the speed, so pretty decently quick as well, because again, he is used in the arena. We don't want him too slow. Full crit rate, 254 on the crit damage, and then 330 on the accuracy, which is enough for Doom Tower hard waves, but also enough to kind of land stuns here and there on lower resistance champions in the arena. For the blessing, I did go with Polymorph primarily because it gives him flat defense. That's basically it. But he also does have some accuracy in the build, so he can actually land it on low resistance targets if it happens to proc. For the masteries, this is the first pure nuker that we've mentioned in this particular showcase, and so we have some of the standard offense tree things where we're coming down to Heart of Glory, for example, Ruthless Ambush, stuff like that. Opportunist, because he does play stuns, and so if he hits targets after he stuns them, then he just does 12% more damage, so keep that in mind. Ending on Helm Smasher, because we do want to ignore defense on top of the Savage set, and we're pairing that with a pretty standard split on the defense tree coming down to Retribution, because he's very, very tanky, and if he counterattacks, he's very, very likely to kill one of their nukers. And last up, we have my Pythion hybrid PvE PvP build in a regen set. I probably, if I had the gear, free-to-play problems of not having forge passes, I'd probably build him in Bolster. I think that's probably overall the best set for him, because you get the irremovable shield as well as the healing partially compared to the regen set. But I digress. So total stats on Pythion, 86,000 on the HP, so super tanky boy. Almost 3,000 on the defense, 254 on the speed, so pretty quick as well. 545 on the resistance, because I don't want him to get debuffed at all if possible, which is fine for PvE. This is still quite low for PvP, and he definitely gets debuffed there. For blessings, he's been through many, many iterations, but I've ultimately settled on Life Harvest because it's really nice when enemies, we're in a reviver meta for the arena, and so when a bunch of units get revived, he gets a bit of turn meter and also a decent chunk of HP and potentially resistance later on and speed. For the masteries, as you might suspect, he's also going down defense and support, so picking up a bunch of the healing masteries coming down to lasting gifts to extend the block debuffs and potentially the strengthen on the revive, and a bunch of the tanky healing stuff stats here, or masteries here, and then we're all the way coming down to Unshakable for more resistance. So that's going to do it for the first iteration of the dungeon progression mini series on the channel. I'm open to feedback, so let me know if there's something that I didn't cover that you wanted me to, or if there's something that you guys don't think is as relevant to these videos and I can cut them out in future installments. If you did find this video helpful, then be sure to hit that like button down below, which will let me know that you did actually enjoy the content and you would like to see more of it in the future. And also, if you did enjoy the video, then be sure to hit that subscribe button down below for more content just like this one in the future. Thanks for watching, and have a good one.